Absolute positioning isn't something that you're going to use all that often, but on occasion you'll find a need to precisely place an element within your layout, and absolute positioning gives you the ability to do just that. So in order for us to take a look at an example of absolute positioning, what I'd like you to do is come over to the Files panel, and if you're still inside the photography website, you can come into the Chapter 8 folder. And inside the Chapter 8 folder is a file called absolutetest.html. Go ahead and open that, and once you open it, the document contains a wrapper div element, and inside that wrapper div is a header element. Let's go ahead and take a look at this within a web browser. I'll go ahead and preview it in Safari. So here we have this header inside this wrapper. The wrapper has a white background, the header has this mustard type color background, and the body element has this gray background. Now, I colored it in this way so you can clearly see what's going to happen when you decide to absolutely position something. And what we're going to absolutely position is this header element. So I'm going to go ahead and close the web browser and return back into Dreamweaver. I'm going to double click the Files panel to collapse it. Once you do that, you can go ahead and select the Style element, and there you'll find the header selector. What we want to do here is change the position to absolute. Go ahead and select that, and when you do, you probably don't notice much of a difference here in Design View. Then what we're going to do is we're going to set an offset, just like we did with relative positioning. We're going to go ahead and set the top to 0 pixels. When you do that, you will see a shift. When you absolutely position something, you remove it from normal document flow. So if there was content underneath the header element, that content would get pushed up to occupy the newly vacated space by the header element. Additionally, when you decide to use absolute positioning, the position values, or I should say the offsets that you apply here, are relative to the container closest to that element that contains the position property. And that may seem somewhat confusing, but again, this is why I set up background colors for each of the elements that we have within this document. Right now, the header element, if we look at the structure, is contained within the div wrapper element. But as you can see, that 0 pixel offset isn't being positioned relative to the wrapper, even though the header is contained within it, because the header was removed from normal document flow. And when you assign the position property an absolute value, it's going to use these offsets relative to its closest parent that uses a positioning property. And in this case, the wrapper element, or the wrapper ID selector, doesn't contain a position value. Therefore, the header element is currently being offset from the body element. And that's further illustrated by taking a look at this within a web browser. I'll go ahead and save this and preview it in Safari. You can see that 0 pixel offset from the top is occurring relative to the body element. Now, if we go ahead and click and drag this, you'll notice it always stays at 0, regardless of the height of the browser. To further illustrate that, I'll come back into Dreamweaver, and I'll select the header selector again. And with the header selector highlighted, let's go ahead and apply a left offset. I'm going to go ahead and set this left offset to something like 20 pixels. Again, this is being positioned relative to the body. So if I go ahead and save this and take a look at it within a web browser, you'll notice that the header now looks like it's floating outside the wrapper because its offset is relative to the body. So how can you get this header element to be offset relative to the wrapper? Well, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is assign a value to the position property for the wrapper element. Now here you can come over and choose relative. If you choose relative but don't assign any offsets, you're not going to see any positioning take place. So really the value of adding the relative value to the position property for the wrapper element is really for the header element because you're using absolute positioning. Now the offset of 0 pixels and 20 pixels left is relative to the wrapper element. And if we go ahead and save this and take a look at it within a web browser, you'll notice that it always stays 20 pixels from the left and 0 pixels from the top of the wrapper. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of how absolute positioning differs from relative positioning. You're never going to set up an entire page using absolute positioning. You'll reserve absolute positioning for special cases within your document. So absolute positioning and relative positioning give you the ability to place content within the containers of your overall layout.